The boy was already sinking when the crowd began to step back. Water churned violently in the drainage canal as Adaeze struggled, his small hands slipping beneath the surface. People shouted, pointed, recorded, but no one moved. "Where is his security?" someone yelled. "He'll pull you in," another warned. Then Adaeze ran forward, barefoot, breathless, one hand pressed against her swollen belly. Before anyone could stop her, she jumped. Moments later, she dragged the unconscious boy out of the water, shaking, soaked, gasping. But instead of gratitude, silence fell. Because the first question wasn't who saved him. It was why would someone like her even dare to touch him? Before we go on, where are you watching from and what time is it there right now? If stories like this move you, take a second to subscribe. You don't want to miss what happens next. Before the sun rose over Lagos, Adaeze Okafor was already awake. Not because she wanted to be, but because hunger did not allow her the luxury of sleep. The small room she rented sat behind a row of crumbling buildings near Mile 12 Market, where the smell of vegetables, diesel fumes, and damp earth never truly left the air. The walls were thin, patched with uneven cement, and the roof leaked whenever the rain decided to linger. At night, the hum of generators and distant voices blended into a restless lullaby that never quite soothed her. Adaeze lay still for a moment, staring at the cracked ceiling. Her hand rested gently on her belly. There was a time when that touch would have filled her with quiet joy. Now it carried something heavier, fear, responsibility, and a question she asked herself every single morning. How will I survive today? She pushed herself up, slowly, wincing as a dull ache spread across her lower back. Pregnancy had changed everything. Her balance, her strength, her energy, but the world around her had not changed at all. The market still demanded movement. Customers still expected smiles. Hunger still waited patiently for any sign of weakness. Outside, the sky was just beginning to lighten. Adaeze wrapped her faded wrapper tightly around her waist, adjusted her headscarf, and stepped into the early morning air. The ground was still cool beneath her feet, but she knew it would not stay that way for long. Lagos did not wait for anyone. By the time she reached the market, the place was already alive. Voices called out from every direction. Traders arranged their goods in careful displays: bright red tomatoes, green peppers, onions, piled high like small hills of survival. The air buzzed with negotiation laughter and the constant rhythm of life pushing forward. Adaeze made her way to her usual spot, a narrow space between two older traders who had long stopped asking her questions. She preferred it that way. Quiet meant fewer judgments. Carefully, she lowered the basin from her head and began arranging her vegetables. Each piece mattered. Each tomato, each pepper, each handful of greens represented something fragile: today's meal, tomorrow's rent, the thin line between holding on and falling apart. Morning Adaeze. The voice came from Mama Sadia, the older woman beside her who sold dried fish and spices. Adaeze forced a small smile. Morning, Mama. Mama Sadia's eyes lingered on her belly for a moment longer than necessary. Not unkindly, but not without concern either. You should be resting, the older woman said softly. This condition is not something to play with. Adaeze nodded, though they both knew rest was not an option. If I rest, she replied quietly. Who will feed the child? Mama Sadia sighed, but said nothing more. Because there was nothing more to say. As the morning grew brighter, customers began to arrive. Some greeted her politely, others barely looked at her. A few whispered. Adaeze had learned to recognize the tones, the subtle shift in voices, when people thought she couldn't hear them. She's still here, who knows who got her pregnant? Women these days. She kept her eyes down. She had heard worse. There was a time when those words would have broken something inside her. But now they passed through her like wind through open space, felt but no longer able to destroy. Still, the loneliness remained. The father of her child, Chike, had disappeared months ago. At first he had promised to return, promised to fix things, promised to be a man, but promises Adaeze had learned were the easiest things to make and the easiest to abandon. The last time she saw him, he couldn't even meet her eyes. Since then, silence, no money, no message, no explanation, just absence. Adaeze adjusted the tomatoes in her basin, pushing away the memory. There was no space for it now. Around midday, the heat began to press down heavily on the market. Sweat gathered along her neck, her back, her temples. Her legs ached from standing, and every now and then she had to pause, placing one hand against her belly, as if reminding herself to breathe. A young woman approached her stall, scanning the vegetables. "How much for this?" she asked, picking up a handful of peppers. Adaeze straightened slightly. 200 naira, the woman scoffed. Too much. Adaeze hesitated. She could lower the price. She often did. But today she couldn't afford to. "It's fresh," she said gently. "I bought it this morning." The woman dropped the peppers back into the basin with a dismissive shrug and walked away. Adaeze watched her go, then lowered her gaze again. Every lost sale mattered, every single one. Hours passed. The sun climbed higher, the crowd thickened, and still Adaeze remained, selling, waiting, enduring. At one point, a sudden wave of dizziness hit her. The world blurred slightly at the edges. She gripped the side of her basin, steadying herself. "Are you all right?" Mama Sadia asked quickly. Adaeze nodded, though her voice came out softer than she intended. "I'm fine." But she wasn't. Not really. Her body was tired, her spirit more so. Yet she stayed, because leaving meant no money, and no money meant no food. Late in the afternoon, as the market began to shift toward evening rhythm, Adaeze gathered what little she had sold. It wasn't much, barely enough, but it would have to do. She carefully tied her wrapper tighter, lifted the basin back onto her head, and began the slow walk home. The streets were still busy. Cars honking, motorcycles weaving through traffic, voices rising and falling in familiar chaos. Adaeze moved through it all quietly, almost invisibly. As she passed by a group of children playing near the roadside, one of them laughed loudly, splashing water from a nearby puddle. For a brief moment, Adaeze paused. She watched them. The ease, the freedom, the way laughter came without effort. Her hand instinctively moved to her belly again. A small, fragile smile touched her lips. "Just hold on," she whispered softly. "We will be okay." But even as she said it, she knew. Hope was something she had to create for herself, because the world around her offered very little of it. And tomorrow, she would have to wake up and fight all over again. In a city that never slowed down, power often moved silently. Behind tinted glass, through guarded gates, and inside offices where decisions were made in quiet tones that could shape thousands of lives without ever touching the ground they stood on. That was the world of Chief Olumide Adeyemi. Long before the streets of Lagos came alive with the noise of traders and commuters, Olumide was already awake, standing before the wide glass windows of his Ikoyi mansion, looking out at a city that had made him everything he was. From that height, Lagos looked almost peaceful, orderly, controlled, but Olumide knew better. He had built his empire from understanding its chaos. A self-made man, they called him. A visionary, a leader, a force, and all of it was true. His company, Adeyemi Holdings, stretched across industries, real estate, logistics, energy. His name opened doors that others spent lifetimes knocking on. Politicians returned his calls. Investors trusted his judgment. Newspapers followed his every move. But none of that mattered in the quiet moments. Because in those moments, he was just a father who barely knew his son. "Sir, your car is ready." The voice of his assistant Kunle broke the silence. Olumide nodded without turning. "I'll be down." Behind him, the house was already awake. Staff moved efficiently, preparing breakfast, arranging schedules, maintaining the rhythm of a life that functioned like a well-oiled machine. At the center of it all was a small boy, sitting alone at a long dining table. Adaeze, 7 years old, neatly dressed in his school uniform. His legs didn't quite reach the floor from the tall chair, and his fingers traced invisible patterns on the polished surface of the table as he waited. A plate of food sat untouched in front of him. The door opened and Olumide entered. For a brief moment, Korede's face lit up. "Daddy." Olumide gave a small nod, already glancing at his watch. "Good morning." He sat down across from the boy, but his attention remained divided. His phone vibrating softly in his hand, messages flashing across the screen. Decisions waiting to be made. Korede watched him, hoping, waiting. "Daddy, today at school, eat your food." Korede Olumide interrupted gently but firmly. "You'll be late." The words weren't harsh, but they were final. Korede's shoulders dropped slightly. "Yes, Daddy." He picked up his spoon. Silence returned to the table. Not the peaceful kind. The heavy kind. The kind that grows when words are left unsaid for too long. Olumide finished quickly, standing before the boy had taken more than a few bites. "I have meetings today," he said, adjusting his cufflinks. "I may be late." Korede nodded again. He had learned not to ask when his father would return, because the answer was always uncertain. As Olumide turned to leave, he paused briefly, looked at the boy. Something flickered in his expression, something almost like regret. But it passed quickly. "I'll see you later," he said. And then he was gone. The door closed softly behind him. Korede remained seated, staring at the empty chair across from him. The food in front of him no longer mattered. Neither did the silence, because he was used to it. Outside, the black SUV waited. Security men stood alert, scanning the surroundings with practiced precision. Olumide stepped into the vehicle without hesitation. The door shut, and just like that, he was carried back into the world that demanded everything from him. Traffic parted, phones rang, meetings stacked upon meetings. By midday, Olumide was no longer a father. He was a CEO again. Inside the towering headquarters of Adaeze Holdings, everything moved with purpose. Assistants walked quickly through polished corridors. Executives gathered in conference rooms where strategies were drawn, numbers analyzed, futures decided. At the center of it all sat Olumide, calm, focused, unshaken. "Quarterly projections are strong," one executive reported. "But we need to address the public relations concerns around the waterfront expansion." Olumide leaned back slightly. "Handle it." "Sir, there are community complaints. Handle it." He repeated, his tone unchanged. There was no anger, no impatience, just authority. The kind that didn't need to raise its voice to be obeyed. Across the table, Mrs. Ronke Balogun, head of public relations, nodded immediately. "It will be managed, sir." Olumide didn't question how. He rarely did. Results were what mattered. Outside the building, far from the polished floors and controlled conversations, life continued in a different rhythm. Closer to the streets, closer to the reality most people lived in, and closer than Olumide realized, to where his son would soon be. That afternoon, Korede's school bus arrived home later than usual. Instead of going inside, the boy wandered toward the nearby street, where construction had left parts of the drainage canal exposed. The guards at the gate were distracted, one on his phone, another speaking with a delivery driver. It only took a moment, a small moment, the kind no one notices until it's too late. Korede stepped closer to the edge, curious, careless, a child in a world that had always been controlled for him. He looked down. The water below moved quickly, murky and unpredictable. He took one more step, and then the ground beneath him shifted. A loose edge, a sudden slip, A gasp that no one heard in time, and just like that, he was gone. The world didn't stop, not immediately. Cars still passed, voices still filled the air. But within seconds, something began to change. A scream, then another. People started running toward the canal, pointing, shouting, "Someone is in the water, help him." But no one jumped, not yet, because fear is faster than courage, and hesitation is often louder than instinct. Some pulled out their phones, others argued, a few stepped closer, then stopped. The current looked too strong, the risk too high. It's not safe. Wait for help. Where are the security people? Minutes felt like hours, and the boy kept sinking. Somewhere far away in an air-conditioned boardroom, Olumide's phone buzzed. He ignored it. The meeting continued. Numbers, voices, decisions, until the phone buzzed again, and again. This time, Kunle leaned closer, his voice urgent. "Sir, you need to take this." Olumide frowned slightly, taking the phone. "Yes." The voice on the other end was shaking. "Sir, it's Korede." Everything inside him stilled. "What about him?" Pause. A breath. "Then, sir, there's been an accident." Olumide stood up so suddenly his chair slid backward. The room fell silent. "What accident?" He fell into the canal near the estate. For a moment, Olumide didn't move, didn't speak, didn't breathe. The world he controlled so effortlessly suddenly felt like it was slipping through his fingers. "Is he out?" he demanded. Another pause. "Longer this time. We are trying, sir. Trying." The word echoed in his mind like something fragile breaking. Olumide didn't wait for anything else. He was already moving, out of the room, down the corridor, toward a reality he had never prepared himself to face. Because for the first time in years, power meant nothing, and all that mattered was a small boy, fighting to stay alive. By the time the shouting turned into panic, the water had already swallowed him twice. The drainage canal, swollen from days of heavy rain, surged with a violent force that no one had expected. What usually looked like a shallow, sluggish flow had transformed into something darker, faster, hungrier. People gathered quickly, too quickly, because crowds always came before courage. "He's there, I can see him. God help him. He's going under. Where are the gods?" Voices overlapped, sharp and frantic, yet strangely powerless. Men stepped forward, then hesitated. Women covered their mouths, eyes wide with fear. A few young boys climbed onto broken concrete edges, pointing into the rushing water. And in the middle of it all, Korede Adeyemi, a small figure struggling against a current far stronger than him. His head broke the surface for a split second. A gasp, a cry. Then the water dragged him back under. "Jump now," someone yelled. "You'll die if you go in." Another voice shouted back. Phones appeared. Hands trembled, not with action but with recording. Because fear always finds a way to disguise itself as caution. A security guard finally pushed through the crowd, breathless and confused. He looked into the canal, then stepped back almost immediately. "The current is too strong," he muttered. "Call emergency services. They're already on the way," but time did not wait for sirens, and the boy was running out of it. A woman began to cry. A man cursed under his breath. Another shook his head slowly as if preparing himself for the worst. And then, a voice, soft but firm, cut through the noise. "Move!" At first, no one noticed her. She didn't shout. She didn't push. She simply stepped forward. Adaeze. Her wrapper was damp with sweat, her face pale from exhaustion. One hand instinctively pressed against her swollen belly as if reminding herself of the life she carried. The crowd turned confused. "Where are you going?" someone asked. Adaeze didn't answer. Her eyes were fixed on the water, on the place where Korede had disappeared. For a brief moment, everything else faded, the noise, the fear, the whispers. There was only one thought in her mind. A child is dying. That was enough. She dropped the small cloth bag she carried. "Don't!" Mama Sadia's voice rang out from behind the crowd. Adaeze, no. But Adaeze was already moving. Barefoot, she stepped onto the broken edge of the canal, the rough concrete scraping against her skin. A man grabbed her arm. "Are you mad? You're pregnant." She pulled away. "If no one goes," she said quietly, "he will die." The simplicity of her words silenced him for a second, just long enough. Then she jumped. The splash was sharp, sudden, cutting through the air like a decision no one else had made. The crowd gasped. "Oh my God, she's gone in. Someone stop her." But it was too late. The water hit her body like a force she had underestimated. Cold, heavy, unforgiving. For a moment, Adaeze disappeared beneath the surface. The current dragged at her clothes, pulling her sideways, threatening to spin her under. Her chest tightened, her breath fought for space, and deep inside her, fear rose. Not for herself, but for the life she carried. Her hand instinctively moved toward her belly beneath the water. Hold on, she thought. Then she forced herself upward. Her head broke the surface. She gasped, coughing as water filled her mouth. "Where is he?" someone shouted from above. Adaeze turned her eyes, scanning frantically. There. A flicker of movement. A small arm. Then gone again. She pushed forward. Every movement was heavier than it should have been. Her body resisted her, weighed down by exhaustion and the strain of pregnancy. The current fought her with every step, pulling her sideways, dragging her back. But she kept going, because turning back was not an option. Korede, someone screamed from the crowd, the name echoing across the chaos. Adaeze didn't know his name, didn't know who he was, but she knew what he was. A child. That was enough. She dove. The water closed over her head, swallowing sound, swallowing light. For a moment, there was nothing. Then her hand touched something. Fabric, a small body. She grabbed him. Korede's arm was limp in her grip, his body heavier than it should have been. Adaeze pulled him closer, wrapping her arm around him tightly. "Don't let go." The thought repeated in her mind like a command. The current surged again, stronger this time. It twisted them both, dragging them sideways, forcing her to fight for balance she no longer had. Her lungs burned, her strength faded, her body screamed at her to stop. But she couldn't, she wouldn't. With everything she had left, Adaeze kicked upward. The surface felt impossibly far. Then light, air. She broke through, gasping violently. "I've got him," she shouted, though her voice barely carried. The crowd erupted. She found him. "Pull them out. Help her." But still, no one jumped in. Instead, a few men stretched out their arms from the edge, shouting instructions as if distance could replace action. "Bring him here, hold on." Adaeze tried. She really did. But every movement felt slower now, heavier. Her arms trembled under the weight of the boy. Her legs struggled against the current. And for a brief, terrifying moment, she slipped. The water surged over her again, pulling both of them under. A collective scream rose from the crowd. No, but Adaeze held on, even beneath the water, even when her body felt like it was breaking. She held on, because letting go was not something she knew how to do, not in this life, not after everything. She pushed again, fought again, rose again, this time closer to the edge. Hands reached down, finally, desperately. A man grabbed Korede, first pulling him up with urgency. "Take him!" Adaeze gasped. The boy was lifted out, his body, limp water dripping from his clothes. "Is he breathing? Check him!" Voices blurred together, but Adaeze remained in the water. For a second longer. 2. Then her strength gave out. Her hands slipped against the concrete edge. Her body sagged. A guard finally leaned down, grabbing her arm and pulling her up with rough force. She collapsed onto the ground beside the canal, coughing violently as water spilled from her mouth. Her chest rose and fell rapidly. Her entire body shook. Around her, chaos continued. People surrounded Korede. Someone began chest compressions. Another shouted into a phone, "Come on, breathe, don't die." Adaeze turned her head weakly, her eyes fixed on the boy, on the life she had just pulled back from the edge. For a moment, nothing happened. Then a cough, a small broken sound. Water spilled from Korede's mouth as his body jerked slightly. "He's breathing." The words exploded through the crowd like a release of pressure, relief, shock, disbelief. Adaeze closed her eyes, just for a second. A quiet breath escaped her lips. Thank God. But when she opened them again, something had changed. The way people looked at her. Not with gratitude, not with warmth, but with something else, something colder. Suspicion. Distance. A whisper rose from somewhere in the crowd. "Who is she?" Another voice followed. Why was she even there, and just like that? The moment shifted, from miracle to doubt. The moment Korede coughed, the crowd exhaled. But relief, as Adaeze would soon learn, did not belong to her. Hands rushed toward the boy, lifting him, wrapping him, calling his name with urgency and fear. Someone removed a jacket and covered him. Another voice shouted for space. "Give him air. Call his father. Move back in seconds." Korede was surrounded, protected, claimed. Adaeze lay a few feet away, alone. Her body trembled uncontrollably, soaked clothes clinging heavily to her skin. Mud smeared across her arms. Her breathing was uneven, shallow. One hand rested instinctively over her belly as if checking again and again that the life inside her was still there. No one checked on her. Not yet. The first security man pushed through the crowd, his voice sharp, authoritative. "Step back. Everyone step back." His eyes landed on Korede, and panic flickered. "Sir's son," he whispered under his breath. That changed everything. Within moments, more guards arrived, forcing people aside, creating a barrier around the boy. Radios crackled. Orders were given quickly, urgently, but then the guard's gaze shifted toward Adaeze, still on the ground, still catching her breath, still trying to sit up. "Who is she?" he demanded. The question hung in the air like something dangerous. Adaeze blinked, confused. She started, her voice weak. "I brought him out." But her words didn't land the way they should have. Instead, they raised something else. Suspicion. A murmur spread through the crowd. "She's the one who touched him. Where did she come from? Was she even supposed to be here?" The guard stepped closer, his eyes narrowing. "You pulled him out?" Adaeze nodded slowly. "Yes." Another guard joined him, whispering something low and quick. Adaeze couldn't hear the words, but she could feel the shift. The air had changed. "What were you doing near the canal?" the first guard asked. The question struck her harder than expected. "I was passing," she replied. "I heard people shouting, and you jumped in," he cut in. She hesitated. "Yes." Why, the word came sharp. Too sharp. Adaeze stared at him. For a moment she didn't understand. "Because he was drowning." The guard's expression didn't soften. If anything, it hardened. Behind him, someone whispered louder now. "People like her. You never know. She could have pushed him, or planned something." Adaeze felt something twist in her chest. Not physical pain, something deeper. "You think she began, her voice trembling. But no one let her finish. "Stand up," the guard ordered. Adaeze tried. Her legs shook beneath her weight. Her body resisted. "I can't," she said softly. The second guard grabbed her arm. "Stand up." The grip was firm, too firm. Pain shot through her arm as she was pulled to her feet. A gasp escaped her lips. "Careful." Mama Sadia's voice broke through the crowd as she pushed forward. "She is pregnant." The guards glanced briefly at Adaeze's belly, but it didn't change their posture. "Stay back, Mama," one of them warned. Mama Sadia didn't move. She saved the boy, she insisted. "All of you were standing here doing nothing." A few people lowered their eyes, but not enough. The first guard's voice dropped slightly, but the tension remained. "We are just doing our job." Adaeze stood there unsteady. Her wet clothes clung to her body, her hair stuck to her face, her chest still rising too fast. She looked at Korede, now lying on a stretcher, breathing, alive. That should have been enough. It should have ended there. But it didn't. Instead, a man stepped forward from the edge of the crowd. Well-dressed, someone whispered. Important, connected. He looked at Adaeze with thinly veiled disgust. "Do you know whose child that is?" he asked. Adaeze shook her head slowly. "No, that is Chief Olumide Adeyemi's son." The name meant something to everyone around. A ripple passed through the crowd. Respect, fear, distance. Adaeze said nothing. She only looked at the boy again. To her, he was still just a child. But to them, he was something else entirely. The man continued, his voice low but cutting. "And you expect us to believe you just jumped in?" Adaeze felt her throat tighten. "I didn't think she started." "Exactly," he snapped. "You didn't think." The implication hung heavy. Reckless, suspicious, uninvited. "Search her," the second guard said, suddenly. Adaeze's eyes widened. "What search her?" he repeated. She could have taken something. The accusation landed like a blow. "I didn't take anything," Adaeze said quickly, her voice breaking. But they were already moving. Hands checked her wrapper, her pockets, her small cloth bag already soaked, already empty. People watched, some curious, some uncomfortable, most silent. Because silence was easier than standing up. Mama Sadia stepped forward again, anger rising in her voice. "This is shameful." She saved that boy, but no one echoed her. No one stepped beside her. No one challenged the guards. Adaeze stood there as they searched her. Humiliated, exposed, invisible in the worst possible way. After a moment, one of the guards straightened. "There's nothing." Of course there wasn't. Adaeze exhaled slowly, but relief didn't come, because the damage was already done. The first guard stepped back slightly, his tone shifting just enough to sound less aggressive, but not apologetic. "You can go. Just like that." No thank you. No acknowledgement. No humanity. Adaeze didn't move immediately. Her body felt heavy, her chest tight. She looked at Korede one last time. At the boy, whose life she had pulled from the water, at the center of all this chaos. He was still breathing. That was enough. She turned, slowly, carefully. Each step felt heavier than the last. Behind her, the crowd began to disperse, the moment already fading into something else, something easier to forget. "Come," Mama Sadia said softly, reaching for her arm. "Let me help you." Adaeze nodded. She didn't trust her voice anymore. As they walked away, her legs trembled beneath her, her body still shaking from the cold, from the strain, from everything she had just endured. But it wasn't the water that had drained her. It was what came after. A few steps later, she paused, turned slightly, looked back. The sirens had finally arrived. Too late, as always. Adaeze lowered her gaze and kept walking, her basin of vegetables gone, washed away in the chaos, her earnings for the day gone, her strength almost gone. But something else lingered, a quiet ache, not from her body, from something deeper, because she had risked everything, given everything, and in return, She was treated like a stranger who didn't belong, like someone who should never have stepped forward in the first place. Mama Sadia tightened her grip on Adaeze's arm. "Don't mind them," she said gently. "God sees you." Adaeze nodded faintly, but inside, she wondered. If God saw her, why did the world refuse to? By the time Chief Olumide Adeyemi arrived, the sirens had already faded into the background. The estate gate stood open. Guards lined along the path with rigid posture, their faces tight with tension. A small crowd lingered at a distance, whispers floating like smoke in the air. Something had happened, something serious. Olumide stepped out of the SUV before it fully stopped. "Where is he?" he demanded. No greeting, no delay, only urgency. "This way, sir," one of the guards replied quickly, leading him toward the ambulance parked near the roadside. Each step felt heavier than the last. For the first time in years, Olumide wasn't thinking about contracts, meetings, or strategy. He was thinking about one thing: Korede. As he approached the ambulance, he saw him. Small, still, wrapped in a blanket that looked too large for his fragile frame. A medic was checking his pulse. Another adjusted an oxygen mask over his face. "He's breathing," sir, the medic said quickly. "We stabilized him." Olumide stopped, just for a second. His shoulders dropped slightly, as if the weight pressing on his chest had shifted just enough to let him breathe again. But relief did not settle fully. Not yet. "What happened?" he asked, his voice low, controlled. The guards exchanged glances. One stepped forward. "Sir." He fell into the drainage canal. Olumide's jaw tightened. "How?" Silence. The kind that answered more than words ever could. "I asked," he said again, more sharply this time. He must have wandered close to the edge, sir," the guard replied. "We were." "You were what?" The question cut through the air. The guard swallowed. "Handling a delivery at the gate." Olumide's eyes darkened. In that moment, the polished calm that defined him began to crack. "My son was drowning," he said slowly, "and you were handling a delivery." No one answered. No one dared. The silence stretched heavy and suffocating. Then, a small voice, weak but clear, broke through. "Daddy!" Olumide turned immediately. Korede's eyes were half open beneath the oxygen mask, unfocused but searching. Olumide moved closer, kneeling beside him without hesitation. "I'm here," he said softly. The shift in his voice was immediate. Gone was the authority. Gone was the command. Only a father remained. Korede's small hand reached out weakly. Olumide took it, held it tightly. "Daddy!" Korede whispered again. "I'm here," Olumide repeated. "You're safe." Korede blinked slowly. His lips moved. She saved me." Olumide leaned closer. "Who did?" "The woman." His voice trembled. "In the water." Olumide's grip tightened slightly. "What woman?" Korede swallowed, his eyes struggling to stay open. "She jumped. No one else. She came." His breathing hitched. "Don't let her go." The words landed softly, but they carried weight, a kind of truth that cut through confusion. Olumide looked up sharply. "Where is she?" he asked. The guards hesitated. "Sir, where is she?" "She left, sir." The answer came too quickly, too easily. Olumide's expression hardened. "Left. Yes, sir, after saving my son." Another pause. "Sir, there were concerns." The word felt wrong the moment it was spoken. "Concerns," Olumide repeated. "Yes, sir. We had to ensure what Olumide cut in. That the person who saved my son was treated like a criminal." The guard lowered his gaze. Olumide stood slowly. The shift in the air was immediate. This was no longer just a father asking questions. This was a man who understood power and knew when it had been used. Poorly. "Tell me exactly what happened," he said. This time no one rushed to answer. Because the truth was uncomfortable. She jumped into the canal, so one guard finally said. Pulled him out, and then we questioned her. Olumide stared at him. Questioned her. Yes, sir. Standard procedure. Did you thank her? The guard hesitated. No, sir. Did you offer help, medical attention? Anything? Another pause. No, sir. Olumide exhaled slowly, a long, controlled breath. Not anger. Not yet. Something colder, more precise. Who made that decision, he asked. The guards shifted slightly. No one spoke. Who Olumide repeated decided that the woman who saved my son should be treated with suspicion instead of respect. A voice came from behind him. Calm, composed. It was a precaution, Chief. Olumide turned. Mrs. Ronke Balogun stepped forward, her posture confident, her expression carefully neutral. As head of public relations, she continued, it was important to control the situation before assumptions spread. Olumide's gaze locked onto hers. Control the situation. Yes, sir. We didn't know who she was. There could have been risks. She saved my son, Olumide said quietly. Ronke held his gaze. And we are grateful for that, sir. But in situations like this, perception matters. The wrong narrative could damage. My son almost died, Olumide interrupted. The words landed heavier this time. Not loud, but final. Ronke paused. Just for a moment. Then she adjusted. As I said, sir, it was about managing. No, Olumide said. Firm, clear. It was about fear. The silence that followed was sharp, unavoidable. You were afraid, he continued, that someone like her could not possibly act without motive. Ronke didn't respond, because anything she said now would sound like justification. And justification would not survive this moment. Olumide looked away from her, back toward the canal, toward the place where everything had changed. Find her, he said. The command was immediate. Absolute. Yes, sir. One of the guards replied quickly. I want her name. I want to know where she lives. I want to know if she is all right. He turned back, his eyes scanning every face in front of him. And if any of you treated her with disrespect. The sentence didn't finish. It didn't need to. The message was clear. The weight of it settled into the air like something irreversible. The guard straightened, tension tightening every movement. Yes, sir. Behind them, Correde stirred slightly. Daddy. Olumide turned again, his expression softening instantly. I'm here, he said, kneeling beside him once more. Correde's small fingers tightened weakly around his hand. Don't let them forget her, he whispered. Olumide's throat tightened. For a moment he couldn't speak, because in that simple request, there was something deeper. Something that cut through everything else. He nodded slowly. I won't. The ambulance doors began to close. Medics prepared to move. Sir, we need to take him now, one of them said. Olumide stood, but he didn't step away immediately. His eyes lingered on his son. Then he stepped back. The doors shut. The siren started again. And just like that, Correde was gone from sight. But not from his mind, not from his responsibility. As the ambulance drove away, Olumide remained standing there, still, silent, thinking. Behind him, Ronke watched carefully, calculating, because she understood something others didn't yet. This was no longer just an incident. It was becoming something else, something that could not be controlled easily, something that would demand truth. And truth was rarely convenient. Olumide turned slowly. Start searching, he said. The command was simple, but it carried something heavier now. Not just authority, purpose. Because somewhere in this city, a woman named Adaeze was walking away. Bruised, exhausted, forgotten. And Olumide knew one thing for certain. That was about to change. By the time Adaeze Okafor reached her street, the sky had already begun to dim. Evening in Lagos did not arrive gently. It crept in with noise, with movement, with the restless continuation of a city that refused to slow down for anyone's pain. But Adaeze moved through it quietly, almost as if she no longer belonged to the same rhythm. Her steps were slower now, heavier. Each one carried the weight of exhaustion that had settled deep into her bones. Her clothes had dried unevenly against her skin, leaving behind patches of stiffness and discomfort. Mud still clung to the edges of her wrapper, and her hair, once neatly tied, hung loosely damp and tangled. But it wasn't the physical strain that pressed hardest on her. It was everything else. The silence, the looks, the questions, the way the moment had turned. She paused just outside her small room, resting one hand against the wall as she caught her breath. Her other hand moved instinctively to her belly. Still there, still alive. She closed her eyes briefly. "Thank you," she whispered. She didn't know if she was speaking to God, to herself, or to the fragile life inside her. Maybe all three. The door creaked open as she stepped inside. The room looked the same as she had left it that morning. Small, bare, unforgiving. But today, it felt even smaller. Adaeze lowered herself slowly onto the thin mat in the corner, her body finally giving in to the fatigue she had been holding back all day. The moment she sat, a sharp ache shot through her lower back, forcing a soft gasp from her lips. She leaned forward slightly, her breathing uneven. The silence inside the room wrapped around her. Too quiet, too heavy. For a long moment she didn't move, didn't think, didn't try to make sense of anything. She just sat there. Because sometimes, that was all a person could do. Eventually, hunger crept in. A slow, familiar ache. Adaeze glanced toward the small metal bowl near the wall. Empty. Of course it was. Her vegetables gone. Her earnings gone. The little she had depended on for the day, washed away with the current that had almost taken a life. She let out a small breath. Not quite a sigh, not quite defeat, just acceptance. She pushed herself up slowly, moving toward a small container tucked in the corner. Inside, there were a few handfuls of Gary Dry, simple, barely enough. It would have to do. As she prepared it, her hands moved automatically, her mind drifting somewhere else. Back to the canal, back to the moment. The water, the weight of the boy in her arms, the way the crowd had looked at her afterward. Her chest tightened. She stopped for a moment, gripping the edge of the container. "Why?" she whispered softly. The question lingered in the air, unanswered, because she didn't regret what she had done. Not for a second. If she had to choose again, she would still jump. She would still risk everything. She would still pull that child out. But the way it ended, that part she didn't understand. She swallowed hard, forcing herself to continue. When the food was ready, she sat back down and ate slowly. Each bite felt heavier than it should have. Not because of the food, but because of everything behind it. Outside voices passed by, laughter, arguments, life continuing as if nothing had happened. Adaeze listened quietly, detached, as if she were observing it from a distance. After a while, a knock came at her door. Soft, careful. She looked up, surprised. "Who is it?" she asked. "It's me," came the familiar voice of Mama Sadia. Adaeze stood slowly and opened the door. Mama Sadia stepped inside, carrying a small bowl covered with cloth. "I brought you something," she said gently. Adaze's eyes softened. "You didn't have to, Mama." "I know," the older woman replied. "But I did." She placed the bowl down and uncovered it, warm rice and stew, simple but more than Adaeze had. Adaeze stared at it for a moment. Her throat tightened. "Thank you," she said quietly. Mama Sadia nodded, then studied her face. "You should be in a hospital," she said. "Not here." Adaeze shook her head. "I'm fine." You are not fine, Mama Sadia insisted. You jumped into that water with a child inside you. That is not something you walk away from like nothing happened. Adaeze lowered her gaze. I didn't have a choice. There is always a choice, Mama Sadia said softly. Adaeze looked up. No, she replied gently. Not when someone is dying. The words settled between them. Heavy, true. Mama Sadia sighed. You have a good heart, my daughter, she said. But this world, it does not always reward that. Adaeze gave a faint, tired smile. I know. A silence followed. Then Mama Sadia spoke again, her tone more cautious this time. The boy. They say he is the son of a very powerful man. Adaeze nodded slightly. I heard. They may come looking for you. Adaeze's expression didn't change. For what she asked. Mama Sadia hesitated. I don't know, she admitted. But people like that, their world is different. Adaeze looked down at her hands. Rough, worn, tired. I don't belong in that world, she said quietly. Mama Sadia didn't argue. Because she knew. Adaeze was right. After a while, the older woman stood. I will check on you tomorrow, she said. Adaeze nodded. Thank you, Mama. When the door closed again, the room returned to silence. But this time it felt slightly less heavy. Adaeze sat down slowly, her hand resting once more on her belly. The baby shifted slightly. A small movement, a reminder. She exhaled softly. We're still here, she whispered. Outside, the night deepened. Inside, Adaeze lay down on her mat, her body finally surrendering to exhaustion. Her eyes closed. But sleep did not come easily. Because even in the quiet, the questions remained. The looks, the voices, the way everything had turned. And somewhere far across the city, a powerful man had begun searching for her. But Adaeze didn't know that. She only knew one thing. Tomorrow, she would wake up and fight again. Ketuk fanbe, tiep tuk yukau via jumotninghin jen motninghin hetram tu theoquijin fantam. Morning came too quickly, for Adaeze it always did. Sleep had not fully claimed her, only pieces of it broken and restless. Her body still ached from the strain of the previous day, and when she opened her eyes, the first thing she felt was the weight of it all pressing back down on her. The room was quiet, the kind of quiet that doesn't comfort, the kind that reminds you that nothing has changed. She turned slightly, wincing as a dull pain spread across her lower abdomen. Her hand moved instinctively to her belly. A pause, a breath, then a small movement. Adaeze closed her eyes again. Relief, soft, fragile, but real. We're still here, she whispered. She pushed herself up slowly, every movement deliberate. Today would not be easier than yesterday. If anything, it would be harder. Because now there was less strength, less food, less hope. But still, she had to go. The market would not wait. Life would not wait. And hunger certainly would not. Across the city, in a private hospital room, surrounded by polished floors and quiet efficiency, Adaeze lay in a soft white bed. Machines hummed gently around him. A nurse adjusted the IV line with careful precision, and beside the bed sat Chief Adaeze, still, silent, watching. For the first time in years, his phone lay untouched on the table beside him. Meetings had been cancelled, calls unanswered, because none of it mattered. Not now. Korede stirred slightly, his eyes fluttered open. Daddy. Olumide leaned forward immediately. I'm here. Korede blinked slowly, his gaze searching, still fogged by exhaustion. Am I home? No, Olumide said softly. You're in the hospital. A pause. Then the water. His voice trembled slightly. Olumide's expression tightened. It's over, he said gently. You're safe. Korede swallowed, but the memory hadn't left him. Not yet. She. She came, he whispered. Olumide nodded. Yes. Korede turned his head slightly, his eyes focusing more now. Did you find her? The question came with quiet urgency. Not fear, not confusion. Something else, something deeper. Olumide hesitated. For the first time since arriving, he didn't have an answer. We're looking, he said. Korede frowned slightly. You have to find her. The words were simple, but they carried weight. Olumide felt it. I will, he said. Korede's fingers tightened slightly around the blanket. No one else moved. He continued softly. They were just watching. Olumide didn't speak, because he already knew. She didn't wait, Korede said. She didn't even think. His voice dropped. She just came. A silence followed, heavy, unavoidable, and in that silence, something shifted inside Olumide. Because this wasn't just about what had happened. It was about what had not happened, the hesitation, the fear, the failure, and the one person who had stepped forward when no one else did. Korede looked up at him again. She was scared, he said quietly. Olumide frowned slightly. You saw that Korede nodded, but she still came. The words settled deeply. Because courage was not the absence of fear. It was the decision to move anyway. Olumide leaned back slightly, his mind turning, replaying everything, the reports, the silence, the way his guards had answered, the way Ronki had spoken, controlled, measured, careful, too careful. He turned toward the door. Kunle. The assistant appeared almost immediately. Yes, sir. Any update? Kunle hesitated. We are still searching, sir. Olumide's gaze sharpened. Still. Yes, sir. The area is large and then make it smaller, Olumide said. Kunle nodded quickly. Yes, sir. And the reports from yesterday? Kunle stepped closer, lowering his voice. There are inconsistencies. Olumide didn't look surprised. What kind? Different witnesses are saying different things. Some say no one moved, others claim people tried but failed, and he hesitated. And some are suggesting the woman may have been involved before the fall. The room went still. Korede turned his head slightly. What he whispered. Olumide's jaw tightened. Who is saying that? Kunle glanced briefly at the door. It's being pushed quietly, sir, mostly through indirect channels. Olumide's eyes darkened. Ronke. Kunle didn't confirm it. He didn't need to. Korede pushed himself up slightly, wincing. That's not true, he said, his voice weak but firm. She didn't do anything. Olumide placed a hand gently on his shoulder. Easy. But Korede shook his head. No, he insisted. They're lying. His breathing quickened slightly. She saved me. I saw her. I felt her. His voice broke. She almost didn't make it out. The words cut deeper than anything else, because they carried something raw, something real. Olumide looked at his son, really looked at him, not as a child, but as someone who had seen something he hadn't, and in that moment, he understood something clearly. This was not just about finding Adaeze. It was about protecting the truth. Back in the market, Adaeze had returned to her spot, or what used to be her spot. Someone else had taken part of it. Her absence had been enough. It always was. She stood there for a moment, her basin lighter than usual, her body slower, her spirit quieter. Ah, you came back, a voice said. Adaeze turned. It was one of the traders nearby. His tone was neutral, but his eyes, curious, measuring. Adaeze nodded. Yes. You caused a lot of trouble yesterday, he added casually. The words hit harder than they should have. I didn't cause anything, she said softly. He shrugged. That's not what people are saying. A few others glanced over. Whispers followed. She's the one. The pregnant woman. The one from the canal. Adaeze felt her chest tighten. Not again. Not here. She lowered her gaze, focusing on arranging her vegetables. But it didn't stop. They say she touched the boy. They say she planned it. They say, "That's enough." Mama Sadia's voice cut through the noise. Firm, unapologetic. "She saved a life," she said. "If you people have nothing good to say, then keep quiet." The murmurs softened slightly, but they didn't disappear. Because once doubt enters a space, it rarely leaves quickly. Adaeze continued working, silently, carefully. But inside, something was shifting, not breaking, not yet, but changing. Because this was no longer just about survival. It was about something else now, something she hadn't asked for, something she hadn't chosen. And far across the city, a man with power was getting closer to the truth. By midday, the heat had settled over the market, like a heavy blanket. For Adaeze, every movement felt slower than it should have. Her body had not recovered from the previous day. Each time she bent slightly to adjust her vegetables, a sharp discomfort reminded her of the strain she had pushed through. Her back ached, her legs trembled more easily. Even standing for long periods had begun to feel like a quiet battle she fought without witnesses. But she stayed, because leaving was not an option. Not when rent was due, not when food was uncertain, not when a life depended on her. Still, something had changed. People were looking at her differently now, not with kindness, not even with indifference, but with curiosity sharpened by suspicion. "She's the one," someone whispered again as they passed. "The canal woman." Adaeze kept her eyes down, focused, silent, because she had learned that sometimes dignity meant not reacting at all. Yet even silence had weight. A customer approached her stall, picked up 2 tomatoes, and then hesitated. "You're the one they were talking about, right?" the woman asked. Adaeze nodded faintly. "I saved a child," she said simply. The woman's lips pressed together. For a moment it seemed like she might say something kind, but instead she placed the tomatoes back. "I don't want trouble," she muttered before walking away. Adaeze stood still. The words echoed longer than they should have. "I don't want trouble," as if helping someone had become something dangerous, as if she herself had become something to avoid. She swallowed slowly and continued arranging her goods, 1 tomato at a time, 1 breath at a time. Across the city, the search had begun to narrow. Inside a sleek black SUV, Chief Olumide Adeyemi sat in the back seat, his gaze fixed on the passing streets. The city looked different today, not because it had changed, but because he was seeing it differently. Sekunle said from the front seat, glancing back briefly. "We've confirmed the location." Olumide didn't respond immediately, where he asked after a moment. "Mile 12 Market." Olumide nodded slightly. The name meant something. Busy, crowded, unpredictable, a place where people survived more than they lived. "Any details?" he asked. "Yes," Sekunle replied. "Female, pregnant, sells vegetables, known by the name Adaeze." Olumide's expression tightened slightly. Adaeze. The name settled in his mind. "Is she there now?" "We believe so, sir." Olumide looked out the window again. The traffic slowed. The streets grew tighter, less polished, more real. "Drive," he said. Back at the market, Adaeze felt it before she saw it. A shift, subtle but undeniable. The noise around her didn't stop, but it changed. People began to look in one direction. Whispers spread faster. "Who is that big man? Look at that car!" Adaeze didn't look up immediately. She had learned not to, because whatever it wasn't for her. But then the vehicle stopped. Close, too close, and footsteps followed. Measured, confident, unhurried, the kind of steps that didn't ask for space. They simply took it. Adaeze's hands paused over her basin. Slowly, she looked up and saw him, Chief Olumide Adeyemi. Even without knowing his name, it was clear who he was. The way people stepped back, the way silence formed around him, the way presence alone shifted the air. For a brief moment, their eyes met. Adaeze felt something tighten in her chest. Not fear, something else, something harder to name. Olumide studied her, really studied her. Her clothes, worn, her hands, rough, her posture, tired, her belly, heavy with life. This was the woman, the one his son had spoken about, the one no one had bothered to treat with dignity. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then, "You are Adaeze," Olumide said. It wasn't a question. Adaeze nodded slowly. "Yes." Her voice was calm, but distant. Olumide took a step closer. "My son," he said, "is alive because of you." The words were clear, direct, but they did not land the way he expected. Adaeze didn't smile, didn't soften. She only looked at him. "I'm glad he's alive," she replied. That was all. No pride, no emotion, just truth. Olumide paused. Something about her response unsettled him. "I came to thank you," he continued. Adaeze shook her head gently. "You don't need to." The simplicity of her words caught him off guard. "Why not?" he asked. Adaze's gaze didn't waver. "Because I didn't do it for you." The market fell quieter. People were listening now, watching carefully. Olumide exhaled slowly. "And yet he said you deserve recognition." Adaeze's lips pressed together slightly. Recognition. The word lingered. Yesterday she said quietly, "No one recognized anything." The truth in her voice cut deeper than accusation. It wasn't loud, but it was sharp. Olumide felt it. "I was told there were procedures," he said. Adaeze let out a small breath, almost a laugh, but without humor. "They searched me," she said. A ripple moved through the crowd. Olumide's expression hardened. "They questioned me," she continued. "In front of everyone." Her voice remained steady, but her eyes carried something heavier. "They looked at me like I was the problem." Silence followed. Unavoidable, uncomfortable. Olumide glanced briefly at the people around them, then back at her. "That should not have happened," he said. Adaeze nodded faintly, but it did. Another pause. Longer this time. The space between them, filled with everything unsaid. "I want to make it right," Olumide said finally. Adaeze's expression didn't change. "You can't," she replied. The answer came too quickly, too certain. Olumide frowned slightly. "Why do you say that?" Adaeze looked down briefly at her hands, then back at him. "Because what happened is already done." Her voice softened slightly. "You can't remove it." Olumide studied her. There was no anger in her tone, no bitterness, just acceptance. And somehow that made it harder. "Then let me help you moving forward," he said. Adaeze shook her head again. "I don't want help." The words surprised everyone, including him. "Everyone needs help," Olumide said. "Not like that," Adaeze replied. A slight shift, a boundary, clear, firm. "I don't want to owe anyone," she added. The statement hung in the air, honest, unapologetic. Olumide felt something unfamiliar stir within him. Respect, real, unforced. "I'm not asking you to owe me," he said. Adaeze met his gaze again. "That's how it starts." The quiet certainty in her voice made it impossible to dismiss. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Two worlds standing face to face, neither willing to step fully into the other. Behind them, whispers returned. She refused him. "Do you know who that is?" Why would she say no? But Adaeze didn't turn, didn't react, because this was not about them. It was about her, and for the first time in a long time. She was choosing something for herself. Olumide exhaled slowly. "I understand," he said, but he knew he didn't. Not yet. Still he nodded slightly. I will not force anything. Adaeze inclined her head faintly. Thank you. It was the first time she had said those words to him, but even then, they carried distance, not closeness. Olumide stepped back. The moment was over, or at least it appeared to be. But as he turned to leave, he paused, just briefly. You may not want my help, he said without looking back, but I will still make sure the truth is known. Adaeze didn't respond, because part of her didn't believe him, and another part was too tired to hope. Olumide walked away. The crowd slowly parted. The car door opened, closed, and just like that he was gone. But the air he left behind did not return to what it was, because something had shifted, not just between them, but within them, and neither of them could ignore it anymore. By evening, the story had already begun to change. Not the truth, but the version of it people chose to believe. Inside the sleek offices of Adaeze Holdings, far removed from the dust and noise of Mile 12 market conversations, moved quickly, controlled, calculated, and carefully shaped. At the center of it all stood Mrs. Ronke Balogun, calm, precise, unshaken. She stood before a group of senior staff, a digital screen behind her displaying fragmented reports, social media snippets, and internal notes gathered since the incident. What we are dealing with, she said, her voice steady, is not just an accident. It is a narrative risk. The room remained silent, because everyone understood what that meant. Reputation, image, control. The public does not respond to facts, Ronke continued. They respond to perception, and right now the perception is unstable. She tapped the screen. Images appeared, blurry footage of the canal, voices layered over each other. Confusion, chaos, and in that chaos, she said, a single figure stands out, Adaeze. Even in poor quality, her image carried something powerful. A pregnant woman in the water, pulling a child to safety. It should have been heroic, but Ronke saw something else, a risk she could not fully predict. If we do not define her, Ronke said, someone else will. One of the executives shifted slightly. But she saved the boy, he said cautiously. Ronke turned to him. Yes, she replied, and that is exactly why this is dangerous. The words hung in the air, sharp, calculated. Hero stories attract attention, she continued, and attention invites questions, questions we cannot fully control. What kind of questions? Another executive asked. Ronke didn't hesitate. Where were the security guards? Why was a child of that status unprotected? Why did no one act except a stranger? Silence followed, because the answers were not favorable. We are not here to lie, Ronke added smoothly. We are here to manage exposure. There was a difference, and she knew it. We will acknowledge her involvement, she said, but we will not elevate it beyond necessity. And if she speaks, someone asked. Ronke's lips curved slightly. She already refused engagement. A pause. People like her, Ronke added, do not usually sustain attention without structure. The implication was clear. Adaeze did not have power, and without power, her voice could be shaped, controlled, or dismissed. Prepare a statement, Ronke said. Highlight swift response, emphasize internal protocols, and reduce focus on individual actors, and the inconsistencies. Kunle asked from the side, his tone careful. Ronke glanced at him briefly. We address them if necessary, she replied. Not before. The meeting ended shortly after. Efficient, clean, decisive, but outside that room, the truth was not as controlled as Ronke believed. Back in the hospital, Chief Olumide Adeyemi stood near the window of Korede's room, his reflection faint against the glass. The city stretched out before him, alive, unpredictable, untouched by the decisions being made about it. Behind him, Korede slept, peaceful for now. The machines hummed softly, steady, reliable, unlike everything else. A knock came at the door. "Come in," Olumide said without turning. Kunle stepped inside. "Sir." Olumide remained still. "The statement has been drafted," Kunle said. Olumide turned slowly. "By Ronke?" "Yes, sir." "Read it." Kunle hesitated slightly, then began. Adeyemi Holdings expresses relief that Master Korede Adeyemi is safe following an unfortunate incident. Immediate response protocols were activated, ensuring swift medical attention. We appreciate the concern shown by the public and assure continued commitment to safety. "Stop!" Kunle fell silent. Olumide's expression had hardened. "Is that all?" he asked. "There's a brief mention of the civilian involved," Kunle added. But what it is?" "Minimal." Olumide exhaled slowly. "Of course it was. Does it say her name?" he asked. "No, sir." "Does it acknowledge what she did?" Kunle hesitated. "Not explicitly." A long silence followed, the kind that carried weight, because Olumide understood something clearly now. This was not just oversight, it was intention. "Where is Ronka?" he asked. "In her office, sir." Olumide nodded. "Tell her I want to see her." Ronka did not look surprised when Olumide entered. She rarely did. "Chief," she said, standing slightly. "I was just finalizing the release." Olumide closed the door behind him. "Sit," he said. She did, but her posture remained composed, controlled. Olumide walked toward the desk slowly. "Why is her name not in the statement?" he asked. Ronke didn't hesitate. "Because it is not necessary." Olumide's gaze sharpened. "Not necessary." "Yes, sir. The focus should remain on the outcome, not the individual." "The individual saved my son." Ronke held his gaze. "And we are grateful," she replied. "But elevating her publicly introduces variables we cannot manage." Olumide's voice dropped slightly. "What variables?" Background Ronke said. "Motivation, media scrutiny, public sentiment." She leaned forward slightly. "These situations escalate quickly, Chief. Today she is a hero. Tomorrow someone finds something questionable. Then the narrative turns." Olumide studied her. "And your solution is to erase her." Ronke shook her head calmly. "Not erase. Contain." The word settled heavily. "Because it revealed everything." Olumide stepped closer. "You questioned her," he said. "It was protocol. You searched her, a precaution. You allowed people to suspect her." Ronke's expression remained steady. "I allowed the situation to stabilize." Olumide's eyes darkened. "No," he said quietly. "You allowed fear to speak louder than truth." The silence that followed was sharp. Ronke didn't respond immediately. "Because this was no longer just strategy. This was confrontation." "Chief," she said finally, her tone softer, but still controlled. "My responsibility is to protect the company. And mine," Olumide replied, "is to protect what is right." The words landed firmly, without hesitation. Ronke leaned back slightly. "And if those two things conflict?" she asked. Olumide didn't look away. "Then the company is wrong." For the first time, Ronke paused longer than usual. "Because that answer changed the equation. You are letting emotion guide this," she said carefully. Olumide shook his head. "No." A brief pause. "I am letting truth guide it." The distinction mattered, more than anything else. Ronke exhaled slowly. "Public truth is rarely simple," she said. Olumide nodded. "I know." Then he added, "That is why we don't hide it." The room fell quiet again, but this time the silence carried a shift, because the balance of control was beginning to change. "I want a new statement," Olumide said. "Clear, final, one that names her, one that tells exactly what happened." Ronke's eyes narrowed slightly. "That will open doors," she warned. "Yes," Olumide said. "It will invite scrutiny. Yes, It will expose failures. Olumide held her gaze. Yes. The repetition left no room for negotiation. Ronke leaned back slowly, studying him, recalculating. Because this was no longer about controlling damage. It was about something else, something harder, something she could not easily shape. Very well, she said finally. But understand this, once it is out, we cannot control what follows. Olumide nodded. I'm not trying to control it. A pause. I'm trying to correct it. Ronke said nothing more, because she understood. This situation had moved beyond her, beyond strategy, beyond narrative, into something unpredictable. Outside, the city continued as it always did. Unaware, unbothered, but beneath the surface, forces were shifting. Truth was pushing against silence, and somewhere in a small, quiet room, a woman named Adaeze sat alone, still carrying the weight of a moment the world had not yet fully understood. But soon, it would. Night did not bring Adaeze rest. It rarely did anymore. The room was quiet, but her body refused to settle. Every time she shifted on the thin mat, a sharp discomfort reminded her of how much she had pushed herself the day before. Her lower back throbbed. Her legs felt heavy, swollen, and deep within her, a dull, persistent ache lingered, one she could not fully ignore. She placed a hand over her belly. Still, quiet, too quiet. Adaeze frowned slightly. Move, she whispered. A pause, then a faint flutter. Relief washed through her, but it didn't last long, because something felt off. Not enough to panic, but enough to worry. She closed her eyes, breathing slowly. Just tired, she told herself. We are just tired. But even as she said it, a small fear took root. Morning came, and with it, another decision. Stay or go. Adaeze sat at the edge of her mat, staring at the empty space in front of her. Her body was not ready for another day at the market. That much was clear. But staying home meant no income, no food, no solution. She exhaled slowly, then stood, because survival did not wait for readiness. By the time she reached the market, the whispers had grown louder. Not louder in volume, but in certainty. They said the company will release a statement. I heard she was part of something. They are investigating her. Adaeze stopped walking. The words didn't make sense. Investigating her for what she hadn't even spoken to anyone, hadn't asked for anything, hadn't taken anything. Yet somehow the story was shifting again. She felt her chest tighten, not with anger, but with something heavier. Exhaustion. Because this was not something she knew how to fight. At her stall, fewer customers stopped. Those who did moved quickly, avoiding conversation, avoiding eye contact, as if being near her carried risk. Even Mama Sadia noticed. This is not right, the older woman muttered. People are afraid of what they don't understand. Adaeze said nothing, because she understood something else. People were not afraid of her. They were afraid of being associated with her. And that was worse. Around midday the pain returned, stronger this time. Adaeze bent slightly, gripping the edge of her basin. Her breath caught. She gasped softly. Mama Sadia turned immediately. What is it? Adaeze shook her head quickly. I'm fine, but her body betrayed her. Another wave hit, sharper, deeper. Her knees weakened. Mama Sadia stepped closer. This is not fine, she said firmly. Sit down. Adaeze tried, but even sitting felt wrong. Unsteady, I think, she whispered. Something is wrong. The words hung in the air. Heavy. Real. Mama Sadia didn't hesitate. We are going to the clinic. Adaeze shook her head weakly. No money. I don't care, Mama Sadia replied. This is not about money now. Adaeze opened her mouth to argue, but another sharp pain stopped her. Her breath hitched, her hand pressed harder against her belly. Fear rose, this time stronger than before. Okay, she whispered. The clinic was small, crowded, under-resourced, but it was something. A nurse led Adaeze inside her movements, efficient but hurried. "Lie down," she said. Adaeze did. Her heart raced, not from running, from fear. The doctor arrived shortly after, a tired man with sharp eyes. He examined her carefully, his expression growing more serious with each passing moment. "When did this start?" he asked. "Today," Adaeze replied. "After? Yesterday." He nodded slowly. "You overexerted yourself," he said. "Your body is under stress." Adaeze swallowed. "Is the baby okay?" The doctor didn't answer immediately, and that silence said everything. "We need to monitor you," he said finally. "You should not be standing all day. You should not be carrying weight. You should be resting." Adaeze let out a small, hollow laugh. "Resting," she repeated softly. The word felt foreign, unreal. "If you don't," the doctor continued, "you risk losing the baby." The sentence landed like a blow. Adaeze's breath caught. Her eyes filled, but she didn't let the tears fall. "Not yet, not here." "I can't stop working," she said quietly. The doctor looked at her, really looked at her, and in that moment, he understood. Not as a doctor, but as a human being. "Then find another way," he said gently, "because your body cannot continue like this." Adaeze turned her head slightly, staring at nothing, because she already knew there was no other way. Across the city, the pressure was building. Inside Adaeze Holdings, the revised statement was ready, clear, direct, unfiltered. It named Adaeze Okafor. It described exactly what she had done, and it acknowledged the failure of those who had hesitated. When Olumide read it, he nodded. "This is the truth," he said. Kunle hesitated. "Sir, once this is released." "I know," Olumide replied. But what he didn't say was that this was no longer about consequences. It was about correction. Back at the clinic, Adaeze sat quietly after the examination. Mama Sadia stood beside her. "You will rest," the older woman said firmly. Adaeze shook her head. "I can't." "You will," Mama Sadia insisted, "even if I have to drag you myself." Adaeze smiled faintly, but it didn't reach her eyes. "I will try," she said. It was the only promise she could make, and even that felt uncertain. As they stepped outside, the sun felt harsher than before. The noise louder, the world unchanged. But Adaeze felt different, weaker, more fragile. For the first time she was afraid. Not of people, not of whispers, but of losing something she had not yet even held. She placed her hand gently over her belly. "Stay," she whispered. "Please, just stay." And somewhere far from her, the truth was about to be released. But Adaeze didn't know that. She only knew one thing. Time was no longer on her side. The truth did not arrive quietly. It spread, fast, unstoppable. By late afternoon, the official statement from Adaeze Holdings had already begun, circulating across Lagos, first through news platforms, then across social media, then through conversations that moved from phone screens into the streets. This time there was no ambiguity, no careful reduction, no controlled silence. The statement named her, Adaeze Okafor. It described exactly what had happened at the canal. The hesitation, the fear, the failure, and the moment one pregnant woman stepped forward when no one else did. It did not protect reputations. It did not soften truth. It simply told it. And because of that, everything began to shift. In the hospital room, Korede Adeyemi sat upright for the first time since the incident, a tablet resting carefully in his lap. His eyes moved slowly across the screen, reading each line with quiet intensity. "She's there," he said softly. Chief Olumide Adeyemi, standing nearby, nodded. "Yes." Korede looked up. "You said her name." "I did." A small pause. "Then thank you." The words were simple, but they carried something deeper, relief. Because for Corredi, this was never about power. It was about truth. She was scared, he said again almost to himself. But she still came. Olumide didn't interrupt. Because he knew his son was not just remembering. He was understanding. And in that understanding, there was something powerful. Back at mile 12, Market, the reaction was immediate. People gathered in small groups, phones in hand, voices rising and overlapping as the story spread. "Have you seen this?" They mentioned her name. The company admitted everything. The whispers had changed. No longer uncertain, no longer suspicious, now curious, shocked, even impressed. At her stall, Adaeze sat, quietly, unaware. Her body still felt weak from the clinic visit. The doctor's words echoed in her mind, heavy and unrelenting. "You risk losing the baby." She hadn't returned to selling immediately. Instead, she sat resting as much as she could, her hand occasionally moving to her belly, as if to reassure herself. Mama Sadia stood nearby, watching the growing crowd. Something was happening. She could feel it. Then a young man approached, holding his phone out. "Is this you?" he asked. Adaeze looked up slowly, confused. What he turned the screen toward her. Adaeze leaned slightly forward and saw it. Her name. Her face captured from a distance. The story. Her breath caught. For a moment she didn't move, didn't speak, didn't react, because what she was seeing did not match what she had lived. "They're saying you saved him," the young man continued, "that everyone else was just standing." Adaeze blinked slowly. "They said that she asked." "Yes," he nodded. "It's everywhere now." A small crowd began to form, not with suspicion this time, but with attention. Real attention. "That's her. She's the one. You're the woman from the canal." The energy shifted. Completely. Adaeze felt it, but she didn't know how to respond. Because yesterday these same voices had questioned her, avoided her, looked at her like she didn't belong. And now, they were looking at her like she mattered. The contrast was overwhelming. Mama Sadia stepped forward, her face lighting up with a mixture of relief and pride. "You see," she said, "the truth cannot hide forever." Adaeze's eyes remained fixed on the phone, on the words, on the version of events that finally matched what she had experienced. But even then, something inside her didn't fully settle, because truth coming out did not erase what had happened before. Across the city, the impact reached further. Inside, the company reactions were mixed. Some supported the decision, others feared it. Because now the questions were louder, more direct. Why did no one act? Why was she treated like a suspect? Who made that decision? And those questions did not have comfortable answers. In the hospital, Corrade watched as a short video clip played grainy footage of the canal. The moment Adaeze disappeared into the water, the chaos that followed. He leaned forward slightly. "That's her," he said. Olumide nodded. "I know." Corrade looked up at him. "When can I see her?" The question came without hesitation. Olumide paused, because he didn't have an easy answer. "She needs time," he said carefully. Corrade frowned. "But she helped me." "Yes." "Then why can't I help her?" The simplicity of the question struck deeply, because it exposed something Olumide had been avoiding. The gap between intention and action. Back at the market, the attention had grown. More people approached Adaeze now, some asking questions, some offering praise, some simply staring. "You are very brave. You saved a rich man's son. God will bless you." The words came quickly, easily, too easily. Adaeze listened, but she didn't respond much, because something about it felt strange, unbalanced. Yesterday she had been invisible. Today she was visible, but neither felt real. Mama Sadia leaned closer. "This is good," she whispered. "Now they will treat you better." Adaeze nodded faintly, but her expression remained distant. because deep down she knew something important. Respect that comes after recognition is not the same as respect that exists before it. As the crowd slowly thinned, Adaeze stood. Her body protested immediately. The weakness returned. Sharp, sudden, she steadied herself against the stall. Adaze's Mama Sadia said, concerned. "I'm fine," she replied quickly, but she wasn't. The pain was still there, the warning still clear. And now, something else had been added. Attention, expectation, pressure, things she had never asked for, things she didn't know how to carry. She picked up her basin slowly, her movements careful, measured. "I'm going home," she said. Mama Sadia nodded. "I will walk with you." Adaeze didn't argue, because today she needed the support. As they walked through the market, people still turned, still whispered, still watched, but Adaeze kept her gaze forward, because inside she felt something else, rising. Not pride, not relief, something quieter, uncertain, because even though the truth was finally being seen, her reality had not changed. Her body was still weak, her future still unclear, her survival still fragile, and the child inside her still at risk. She placed her hand gently over her belly. "We're not done," she whispered. Not yet, not even close. Far across the city, Olumide stood at his window again. Watching, thinking, the truth was out. But he knew that was only the beginning. Because now he had to do more than speak it. He had to act on it. And somewhere, Adaeze was still walking alone, carrying everything, with no guarantee that it would be enough. The night air felt heavier than usual, not because the city had changed, but because Adaeze had. Every step back to her room felt like she was carrying more than her body could handle. The attention at the market still lingered in her mind, the sudden shift from suspicion to praise, from avoidance to admiration. It should have felt like relief, but it didn't, because nothing about her reality had actually changed. Her room was still empty, her body still weak, her future still uncertain, and the child inside her still at risk. She stepped inside, slowly closing the door behind her with a soft click. For a moment she leaned against it. Her eyes closed, her breath shallow. The silence returned. But this time it didn't feel peaceful. It felt like pressure. She moved toward her mat and lowered herself carefully, her movements slower than ever. The pain in her abdomen had not left. If anything, it had deepened, subtle, persistent, like something waiting. Her hand pressed gently against her belly. "Stay," she whispered again. The word had become a prayer, a plea, a promise she wasn't sure she could keep. Across the city, inside a quiet hospital room, Adaeze was awake again. Stronger now, but not fully recovered. The events of the past days had left something behind, not just physically but emotionally. He sat upright, his eyes focused on the screen in front of him. Images, clips, comments, the world reacting. She's a hero. Why did no one else help pregnant woman risk her life? Coretta watched silently, absorbing it all. Then he turned to his father. "Daddy." Olumide looked up immediately. "Yes, can we go and see her?" The question came again, softer this time, but more determined. Olumide paused. He had expected this, but knowing it didn't make it easier. "She is not well," he said carefully. Coretta frowned. "What do you mean?" Olumide hesitated. "Then she was hurt," he said, "and she is carrying a child. Her body needs time." Coretta's expression changed, concern replacing curiosity. "Because of me?" The question landed quietly, but it carried weight. Olumide moved closer. "No," he said firmly. "Not because of you." But Coretta didn't look convinced. "She jumped for me," he said. "If she didn't, she would be fine." Olumide exhaled slowly. This was not something he could easily fix. Sometimes, he said carefully, people choose to help, even when it is difficult. That does not mean it is your fault. Korede looked down. His small hands tightened slightly. "But I still want to see her." The request remained. Unmoved, Olumide nodded slowly. "You will," he said. "But not yet." Back in her room, Adaeze tried to rest. But her body would not let her. The pain had grown sharper, less subtle, more demanding. She shifted slightly, her breath catching as another wave passed through her. This time stronger. Her fingers gripped the edge of the mat. "Ah," she gasped softly. The room felt smaller, the air heavier. She tried to breathe through it, slow, controlled, but the pain didn't fade. It lingered, then returned. Again and again. Fear rose, not slowly, not gently, but all at once. Her hand pressed firmly against her belly. "No," she whispered. "Please, no." Another wave hit. Her body tensed, her breath broke. She tried to stand, but her legs failed her. She dropped back down her body, trembling. This was not normal. She knew that now, and the realization terrified her. She reached for the door, pulled herself up slowly, step by step. Each movement felt like a struggle against something stronger than her. She opened the door. The night outside blurred slightly. "Mama," she called weakly. Her voice barely carried. She tried again. "Mama Sadia." This time it came out louder, desperate. A door nearby opened quickly. Adaeze. Mama Sadia's voice came alarmed. She rushed over and froze. Because one look was enough. "Adaeze," she whispered. The fear in her voice was immediate. "We need to go. Now." Adaeze nodded weakly, but she could barely stand. Another wave of pain hit, stronger than before. She cried out softly. Mama Sadia didn't wait. She wrapped an arm around her, supporting her weight. "Hold on," she said firmly. "Just hold on." The journey to the clinic felt longer this time, each step slower, each moment heavier. Adaeze's breathing grew uneven, her body weaker, her grip on Mama Sadia tightening with each wave of pain. "I'm here," Mama Sadia kept saying. "You're not alone." But Adaeze could barely hear her now, because everything else was louder. The pain, the fear, the possibility that she might lose everything. Inside the clinic, urgency replaced routine. The nurse recognized her immediately. "Bring her in," she called. Adaeze was guided to a bed, her body shaking, her breath shallow. The doctor arrived quickly. His expression changed the moment he saw her. "This is serious," he said. "No hesitation, no delay. Prepare for immediate care." Adaeze's heart raced. "Is my baby?" she tried to ask, but her voice broke. The doctor didn't answer directly. Instead, he focused on action. Because right now there was no time for reassurance, only response. Across the city, Olumide's phone rang. He answered immediately. "Yes," Kunle's voice came through. "Urgent. Sir, we found her." Olumide straightened. "Where?" "At a local clinic," Kunle replied. "She was brought in. Her condition is not stable." The words hit hard. "What happened?" "She collapsed, sir." A pause. "Then they say the pregnancy is at risk." Silence followed. Heavy, immediate. Olumide didn't think, didn't hesitate. "I'm on my way." Back in the clinic, Adaeze lay still, her body exhausted, her strength fading. Machines were minimal, resources limited, but effort was everything. The doctor worked quickly, focused, precise. Mama Sadia stood nearby, her hands clasped tightly, her lips moving in silent prayer. "Please," she whispered, "please." Adaeze's eyes fluttered, her vision blurred, her breath shallow. Her hand moved weakly to her belly. One last instinct, one last connection. "Stay," she whispered again. But this time the word felt fragile, uncertain, like something slipping away. Outside, the sound of a vehicle approached. Fast, urgent, unmistakable, and for the first time, two worlds were about to collide again. Not at a canal, not in chaos, but in something deeper, something more fragile. because now it wasn't just about saving a life, it was about whether one could still be saved. The car stopped so abruptly that dust rose around it. Before the engine fully died, Chief Olumide Adeyemi was already out. The clinic stood small and worn, its flickering light struggling against the darkness settling over the street. It was the kind of place he had passed countless times without noticing, but tonight, it was the only place that mattered. Sir Kunle began, but Olumide was already moving. Inside, the air felt thick, heavy with urgency. A nurse rushed past him carrying supplies. Another voice called from the back room. The quiet order of a hospital was absent here, replaced by something more raw, more immediate. "Where is she?" Olumide asked. The nurse glanced at him, startled by his presence, then pointed toward a narrow doorway. "In there." Olumide didn't wait. He stepped through and saw her, Adaeze, lying on a small bed that looked too fragile to hold the weight of everything she had endured. Her face pale, her body still, one hand resting weakly over her belly. Machines were minimal, just a simple monitor, its faint beeping, the only steady sound in the room. Beside her stood the doctor, focused, serious. "How is she?" Olumide asked. The doctor didn't look up immediately. "She came in late," he said. "Severe exhaustion, physical stress, possible complications." Olumide's jaw tightened. "And the baby," the doctor paused. "Then we are trying," the same words, again. But this time they carried something different, because now Olumide understood what those words meant. Trying was not certainty. It was hope under pressure. He stepped closer to the bed. For a moment he simply looked at her. The woman who had jumped into danger without hesitation. The woman who had been questioned, search dismissed. The woman who had walked away, carrying everything alone. And now, she lay here, fighting again, but this time, for herself, for her child. "Adaeze," he said softly. Her eyes didn't open, but her fingers moved slightly. A faint response. The doctor adjusted something beside her. "She needs rest," he said, "and stability. But her body is weak. She has been pushing herself too hard." Olumide didn't respond, because he already knew. He had seen it, at the market, in her eyes, in the way she stood, in the way she refused help, because she had no reason to trust it. A movement near the door drew his attention. Mama Sadia stood there watching, her expression cautious, protective. "Who are you?" she asked. Olumide turned slightly. "I am the father of the boy she saved." The words shifted something. Not fully, but enough. Mama Sadia nodded slowly. "Then you should see what she went through after," she said quietly. The statement wasn't an accusation, but it carried weight. Olumide met her gaze. "I intend to." Outside the clinic, the world had already begun to react again. The official statement had done what Ronki feared. It had opened everything. Journalists were arriving. Cameras, questions, voices rising. "Is it true?" She collapsed. "Where is she now? Can we get a statement?" Security tried to manage the crowd, but this was no longer something that could be controlled. Because truth once released did not stay contained. Inside the clinic, Olumide stepped back slightly, turning toward Kunle. "Call the private hospital," he said. "Arrange immediate transfer. Full care." Kunle nodded. "Yes, sir," the doctor overheard. "That would help," he said. "She needs better facilities." Olumide nodded once, then turned back to Adaeze. For a moment he hesitated, because there was something he needed to say, but no guarantee she would hear it. Still, he spoke. "I was not there when you needed help," he said quietly. The words felt heavier than expected. "But I am here now." A pause. "I will not let this happen again." Her fingers moved again, slightly, as if responding to something deeper than sound. Across the city in the hospital room, Korede Adeyemi sat up suddenly. "Daddy," the nurse turned. He stepped out, she said gently. Korede frowned. "Where?" The nurse hesitated. "Someone needed help," she replied. Korede's expression changed. He understood. Not fully, but enough. "Is it her?" he asked. The nurse didn't answer, but she didn't need to. Korede leaned back slightly, his small hands gripping the blanket. "Please be okay," he whispered. Back at the clinic, tension filled every corner. The doctor moved quickly. The nurse adjusted equipment. Mama Sadia stood close, her prayers growing louder, now no longer whispered, but spoken with quiet urgency. "Adaeze, stay with us," she said. "You are not done yet." Olumide watched, not as a CEO, not as a man of power, but as someone who understood. For the first time, that control had limits, and this was one of them. Minutes passed, then more, each one stretching longer than the last. Then a change, subtle but real. The monitor's rhythm steadied. The doctor paused, watching closely. Then he exhaled. "She's stabilizing." The words broke the tension instantly. Mama Sadia's shoulders dropped. "Thank God," she whispered. Olumide closed his eyes briefly. Not in relief alone, but in recognition. Because this moment could have gone another way. Very easily. He opened his eyes again, looking at Adaeze. Still weak, still vulnerable, but still here. The doctor turned to him. "She will need proper care moving forward," he said. "If she returns to the same conditions, this will happen again." Olumide nodded. "I understand." And this time he truly did. Outside, the noise had grown louder. More cameras, more voices, more attention. Because now the story had reached its peak. A poor pregnant woman who saved a CEO's son. Ignored, humiliated, then nearly lost her own child. It was no longer just a story. It was a reflection of everything people didn't want to admit. Inside, Olumide stepped closer to Adaeze again. She was still unconscious, but her breathing had steadied, her body no longer fighting as violently as before. He looked at her for a long moment, then spoke again. Not for anyone else, not for the cameras outside, but for her. "For what you did," he said quietly, "there is no repayment." A pause, but there will be justice. The words settled, firm, unshaken, because this was no longer about gratitude. It was about correction. Truth had been spoken. Now it would be upheld, no matter what followed. And outside, the world waited, watching, because what came next would decide everything. By morning, the story was no longer just news. It had become a reckoning. Outside the private hospital, where Adaeze Okafor had been transferred, overnight cameras lined the entrance. Reporters stood in clusters, their voices low but urgent, waiting for updates. Social media had already carried the story far beyond Lagos, into homes, into conversations, into hearts that recognized something painfully familiar. A poor woman had done what others were too afraid to do, and nearly paid for it with everything. Inside the hospital, the air was calm, controlled, different from the chaos of the clinic. Machines hummed steadily. Nurses moved with quiet precision. The environment was clean-ordered, almost gentle, and in one of the private rooms Adaeze lay resting, her face no longer pale with strain, but still fragile, her breathing steady, her hand resting lightly over her belly. A nurse adjusted the drip beside her, then stepped back as the doctor entered. "She's stable," he said quietly to Chief Olumide Adeyemi, who stood near the window. Olumide nodded. "And the baby?" The doctor allowed a small, careful smile. "The baby is alive, weak but alive." The words landed like something sacred. Olumide exhaled slowly. "Thank you." The doctor inclined his head slightly. "She will need time," he added, "and support. Real support." Olumide didn't hesitate. She will have it. Adaeze's eyes opened slowly. The light felt softer here, less harsh. For a moment she didn't move, didn't speak, because she didn't recognize where she was. Then memory returned. The pain, the clinic, the fear. Her hand moved instinctively to her belly. A pause. Then a small movement. Her breath caught. Relief flooded through her. Tears filled her eyes, but she didn't let them fall. Not yet. You're safe. The voice came gently. Adaeze turned her head and saw him. Olumide Adeyemi, standing there, not distant this time, not surrounded by power, just present. "You brought me here?" she asked softly. "Yes." A silence followed, not uncomfortable, but unfamiliar. Adaeze looked around the room again, then back at him. "I can't afford this," she said. The words came automatically, a reflex built from years of survival. Olumide shook his head. "You don't have to." Adaeze frowned slightly. "I don't want charity." The sentence came with more strength than expected. Even now, even here. Olumide nodded. "I know." He stepped closer. "This is not charity." Adaeze studied him, waiting. "It is responsibility," he said. The distinction mattered, more than she expected. "You saved my son," he continued, "and when you needed help, you were not given it." His voice didn't rise, didn't accuse, but the truth in it was clear. "That was wrong," he said. Adaeze looked away briefly, because hearing it did something she wasn't prepared for. It acknowledged, not just what she had done, but what had been done to her. "I didn't ask for anything," she said quietly. "I know, and I still don't." Olumide nodded again. "And you won't have to." A pause. "But that doesn't mean nothing will be done." Adaeze's gaze returned to his. "What do you mean?" Later that day, the press conference was held. Not in a boardroom, not behind closed doors, but openly, publicly, where the truth could not be reshaped. Cameras flashed, voices called out. "Chief Adeyemi, is it true your staff mistreated her? What actions are you taking?" Olumide stepped forward, calm, composed, but different. Because today he was not protecting an image, he was correcting it. What happened, he began, should never have happened. The crowd quieted. Not just the accident, he continued, but what followed. He didn't rush, didn't soften. A woman named Adaeze Okafor risked her life to save my son. A pause. She did what others did not. The words landed clearly, unfiltered, and instead of being treated with dignity, she was questioned, searched, and dismissed. A ripple moved through the crowd, because this was not a prepared narrative. This was truth, and for that Olumide said, "I take full responsibility." The statement carried weight, not deflected, not shared, owned. "Those who acted out of fear instead of humanity will be held accountable," he added. No names, but the message was clear. Inside, Adeyemi Holdings changes had already begun. Mrs. Ronke Balogun had been removed from her position. An internal investigation launched, policies rewritten, but more than that, a shift in culture had started. Because this was no longer about one moment, it was about everything that allowed it to happen. Back in the hospital, Adaeze watched part of the press conference on a small screen. Her expression remained quiet, unchanged. But something inside her shifted. Not dramatically, not suddenly, but enough. Because for the first time, the truth had not been taken from her. It had been returned. Mama Sadia sat beside her, smiling softly. "You see," she said, "God does not sleep." Adaeze exhaled gently. "No," she replied, "he doesn't." Later, a small visitor arrived. Carefully, slowly, with quiet excitement, Korede Adeyemi. He stepped into the room, his movements still cautious, his body not fully recovered, but his eyes bright, focused. He stopped near the bed, looking at her. For a moment, Neither spoke. Then, "Thank you," he said. The words were simple, but real. Adaeze smiled faintly. "You're welcome." Coraid hesitated, then stepped closer. "I was scared," he admitted. Adaeze nodded. "I know, but you came anyway," he said. Adaeze looked at him, at the child who had almost been lost. "You would have done the same," she replied gently. Coraid shook his head. "I don't know." Adaeze's smile softened. "You will," she said. The confidence in her voice was quiet, but certain. Days passed. Adaeze grew stronger, slowly, carefully, her body healing, her baby stabilizing, and outside the world moved on, as it always did. But something remained, because some stories do not disappear. They stay, they change people, even if only a little. When Adaeze finally left the hospital, she did not leave alone. Not because she needed saving, but because this time she was not invisible. Support had been arranged, not as charity, but as restoration, a safe place to stay, medical care, a small business opportunity, one she could grow on her own terms, and most importantly, respect, real, unconditional. One evening, weeks later, Adaeze stood outside a small but clean stall. Her stall, new, simple, but hers. She arranged her vegetables carefully, the same way she always had. But this time her body was not trembling. Her breath was steady, and her eyes held something new. Not just survival, but possibility. Mama Sadia stood nearby, smiling. "You see how far you've come," she said. Adaeze nodded, then placed a hand over her belly. "We're still going," she whispered, and for the first time the future didn't feel like something to fear, but something to build. Sometimes the world shows us exactly who we are, not in the moments of comfort, but in the moments of fear, when everyone steps back and one person steps forward. Adaeze did not act because she was strong. She acted because someone needed help. And that simple choice, one moment of courage, changed everything. But her story also reminds us of something deeper. That kindness is not always rewarded immediately. That truth is not always seen right away. And that the world can be quick to judge, especially those it does not understand. Yet still, kindness matters, truth matters, and doing what is right always matters, because in the end, what defines us is not what we have, but what we choose to do when it matters most. If this story touched you, take a moment to share your thoughts in the comments. Where are you watching from, and what time is it there right now? Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this story with someone who needs to hear it. Because stories like this remind us that humanity is still alive.